Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers. And you are in season 4 of Wrestling at Random. I don't know if I would say this is the most random show we've had on the free feed.
No,
I wouldn't say that as far as the promotion. This is a well-known promotion. But when you look at the sheer number of matches that took place on this show with wrestlers from all over the wrestling landscape in this cavernous arena, it certainly is one of the most unique shows that we've reviewed, for better or worse.
Is the correct term. Unique is for sure the correct term. It is the AWA, a territory we're very familiar with, the randomizer. If you're not familiar, we take all of the wrestling content around the internet, we dump it into the randomizer, we fire it up, and it randomly chooses a show for us to watch. So sometimes it's a weekly TV show, sometimes it's a pay-per-view. In this case, this was a major show for the AWA promotion, Wrestlerock 86. This took place April 20th, 1986, from the Metrodome in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 23,000 in attendance with a gate of $300,000.
Never have you seen a show with 23,000 people in it that looked more empty than this did. There were certain sections that looked really full. There were certain ringside camera shots that looked great, and then others that looked terrible. I assume this was the AWA's answer to WrestleMania. Is that correct?
That is correct. Mm-hmm. Almost like a Super Bowl of wrestling, if you will, as the promotion leading up to this, they did a parody of the Super Bowl Shuffle. The Super Bowl Shuffle was gigantic in 1985 and early 1986, as the Chicago Bears recorded a rap song about going to the Super Bowl before the 1985 season, before they actually did go to the Super Bowl. So it was a very bold choice. They did it, and it was when that team was dominant and they went right to the Super Bowl, one of the greatest teams in Chicago sports history.
I remember renting the Super Bowl Shuffle VHS tape from the local Dominic's grocery store in suburban Chicago.
Yeah,
that's how much of a cultural phenomenon this was, at least in Chicago. You could not get away from it.
No, it was everywhere, and it was gigantic. And here they did a parody of the Super Bowl Shuffle, where all the wrestlers were rapping to the beat of the Super Bowl Shuffle.
Larry Zbyszko in particular got into this. Some did not. Larry was feeling it.
Everybody was horrible, except for Nick Bockwinkle, of all guys.
It was great.
Because he could say his lines on beat, and it was I'm like, how is Nick Bockwinkle the best rapper out of this group?
I'll tell you who wasn't the best rapper and could not say the lines on beat. Crusher Jerry Blackwell.
Correct. He
terrible. Had a rough go of it. Vern Gagne, you may be shocked to know, not the most rhythm.
No. So by the end of this, they definitely owed the Chicago Bears an apology.
Yes, and probably some royalties if this show actually made any money, which is debatable.
We go to the show where we get the national anthem sung by a woman with just giant 80s bangs, as you would expect in 1986. And this crowd is big, but like you mentioned, spread out. So like, it's super weird the way that they shot it.
Yeah,
because they didn't just shoot the sections that were full. They would have a shot where you would just see nothing but chairs, and it looked like they were fighting in an empty stadium.
You know what it reminded me of? Those shows that in I don't know if it was 2020, but in 2021, New Japan did those outdoor baseball stadium shows, and they did the one Tokyo Dome show as well. That was sort of similar, the Grand Slam shows where they only maybe had 5,000-6,000 people in a 40,000 or 60,000 seat stadium, and it just looked so weird because you were just seeing a sea of empty seats, and they didn't bother trying to turn the house lights down to hide it. Same thing here. It just, the overall vibe of this show is so strange because it's supposed to be their answer to WrestleMania, but there is zero pageantry. There is no entrance music. There's
Nope.
no like big celebrities. There's a few like local celebrities, but there's nothing about this that feels like they're trying to compete with the rock and wrestling era of the WWF. It's like the AWA being as AWA as possible, and somehow thinking putting that in a bigger 1/3 full building is going to be a challenge to the WWF. Just a bizarre vibe.
They did have Gary Michael Capetta as our ring announcer.
Yes,
I'm here for that all
I
day.
did
And then
not expect that. I enjoyed hearing you say,
Trongard on
"Your
commentary.
winner." He would always say, Gary Michael Capetta would say, and yes, for the majority of the show, at least the first half of it, it's Ron Trongard going Joey Styles flying solo.
Flying solo, and it's totally fine. And yeah, we go to our opening match. Brad Rangans versus Boris Zukov with Sheik Adnan El Casey. And it's this is the opening match of a 5-hour show. And so again, the more things change, the more they stay the same in wrestling.
Yes.
A big show being 5 hours long. This is the opening match, and so a lot of people were still arriving. So it was even more empty than it would be later.
Yes.
And you could hear people, like I could hear a dude yelling, "Up yours, Sheik," over and over again.
Yes. The few voices that were in the arena were bouncing off the walls and making themselves heard. My only note about this match, really, or my only few notes are that Boris Zukov has, for some reason, the missing link haircut here.
He did.
And Ron Trongard loves saying that Brad Rangans is from Appleton, Minnesota.
And can confirm Zukov still better than Nikolai Volkov, as we
the
learned
lowest
from the
bar to
Mid-South
clear.
show. If
You're
you
doing
listen to our
a,
Mid-South show in the bonus feed, we learned that Nikolai Volkov is worse than Boris Zukov.
To clear, you're doing the subterranean limbo to clear that bar, but he at least manages to clear that.
Rangans wins a long match with a power slam, 8 minutes and 31 seconds. I had to double check because, man, it seemed way longer than that.
No, this had big primetime wrestling opening match from Madison Square Garden vibes.
Announced here as the Midget Tag Team Championships. We'll call it the Little Person Tag Team Championships. Guest referee Gary Lumpkin from TV's Good Company. I had no idea what that was. I know Three's Company. I don't know Good Company.
What I'm more amazed by is that there was a guy in this match named Gary Lumpkin, and he was not one of the little people.
He was not.
Opportunity missed.
We looked at so I went ahead and looked it up. The show Good Company. These are the kind of celebrities that we were able to get.
I feel like is that a sitcom about a face turn from Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond?
It was not. It was not. This show lasted 6 episodes. so that's an
odd number of episodes. We just got our first ratings report in, and you guys don't have jobs anymore.
Very canceled. So the little people hit the ring, and there's a guy that looks kind of like Mr. T, and he's teaming with a cowboy, and their opponents come to the ring, and they're announced first as Lord Littlebrook. I know Lord Littlebrook, very famous wrestler. And they announced Chicago's own Little Tokyo.
Yes, I'm so confused. Chicago's own Little Tokyo, before they correct themselves on the ring announcing and tell us that, in fact, little Mr. T is from Tokyo. But Chicago's own Little Tokyo. There are a few things on this podcast that, as I transition to another plane of existence and leave this mortal body, will be in my brain, and I'll be so mad. And Chicago's own Little Tokyo will be one of them.
Yeah, Gary Michael Capetta does correct himself. Little Tokyo happens to be from Tokyo, Japan. So
things make more sense now. That was more of a Ron Trongard mistake, in terms of what I would have expected that to be coming from than good old GMC.
And then we hear their opponent's introduction, and we're told it's Chicago's own Little Mr. T. That's his actual name.
Actual Little Mr. T. They didn't call him like Mr. L or Mr. M. He's Little Mr. T. And
his actual
Cowboy
name.
Lane.
Cowboy Lang. And yeah, twice during this match, Trongard says, short or tall, the AWA has it all. So he
Ron
was
Trongard has a
very excited
list
to get that line in.
of AWA taglines. And whenever he's like doing commentary and realizes, oh my God, I don't have a color commentator, he will just say, the AWA, the major leagues of professional wrestling. Or what you just said, he pulled the string and he says those things. My only note about the action in this, other than that, it's every little person match you've ever seen in North America wise, at least, is that Cowboy Lane here does the littlest northern exposure ever. And I just smiled ear to ear.
He did. I would say though my takeaway from this match was that they actually worked it more like a regular match than a lot of the U.S. little people matches. Those are usually 100% silly spots and crazy,
Yeah, that's
but
true. Which we've
this
seen on
was
some of those Coliseum tapes.
correct. This was a regular match with a few silly spots sprinkled in. So it
I
was
think because they got more time. Like
yeah,
everything on this show got too much time, you could mostly argue. And this definitely fell into that category. So they could actually do a little bit of wrestling before the pratfalls and such.
10 minutes in 1 second. You want to talk about
Oof.
a long time. We're then told Farm Service Director on WCCO Radio, Chuck Lilligren, is going to take the mic.
Nothing
These are the
says
celebrities.
Wrestle Rock Rumble, the AWA's answer to WrestleMania, than Farm Bureau Director Chuck Lilligren, who also, by the way, how could anyone with the Swedish last name Lilligren have the first name Chuck? He sounds like he should be a defenseman for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but then Chuck, he sounds like he should be like fighting in UFC 1. I don't know. I'm confused.
He's the guest ring announcer. For the match, we have Colonel De Beers taking on Chief Wahoo McDaniels. Now, De Beers is in the ring and he's got like a curly sideburn, and I'm like, okay. I'm trying to figure out his facial hair. I'm checking that out, and while I'm looking at this, Rod Trongard tells me that this man De Beers believes in apartheid and white supremacy. He has no time for minorities. Um, I knew Colonel De Beers was a wrestler. I was unprepared, wildly unprepared for this gimmick.
I was a bit more familiar with De Beers than you were, but I was still completely unprepared for just the openness and casualness of the gimmick. Like, it wasn't even presented as though Colonel De Beers may be wrong for having these opinions. They didn't say he was right, but he was not condemned for being an apartheid-loving white supremacist who, direct quote, had no time for minorities. It was just like, this is who he is. Take it or leave it. We're not sure how we feel about it.
Holy cow, was I wildly unprepared for this. Yeah. So the match goes on. Wahoo runs wild. People are enjoying Wahoo. He throws De Beers over the top rope for no reason and gets disqualified. Your winners, Colonel De Beers by DQ. Wahoo, after the match, rams him into the post. They continue fighting. Post-match, just a weird out of nowhere throws a guy over, gets himself disqualified. Super weird.
Yeah, it was very strange, particularly with Wahoo being the one getting disqualified. My favorite part of this match was something that just amuses me to no end throughout the show, where they go to they switch to a camera that's just showing very bored fans ringside, and we see one fan with a foam finger bop his friend on the head with said foam finger in the middle of a never-ending hammerlock by Wahoo McDaniel. More of this. That could have been the gift for this show if Stan Hansen wasn't booked.
Rock and roll Buck Zumhoff and his boombox.
Oh my God. Him trying to cut this promo as the boombox is over-modulating the mic that is attempting to be doing this interview, being held by Ken Resnick. This is brutal.
It is. He's listening to Open All Night, and he's screaming about fighting Tiger Mask. And this match is Tiger Mask versus Buck Rock and Roll Zumhoff.
The thing about this that is utterly shocking to me is that if I saw Tiger Mask and Buck Zumhoff in 1986 AWA on the rundown list, I would have been 100% convinced that it was fake Tiger Mask Ken Wayne.
Yeah, 100%.
This is, in fact, Mitsuharu Misawa, Tiger Mask 2, taking on one of the most detestable human beings in modern pro wrestling history. Legitimately, just look him up. We've talked about it before on the podcast. Rock and Roll, Buck Zumhoff. This is the ultimate randomizer match.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, Zumhoff is a horrible human being in general.
Yes.
I was spanning beyond wrestling. He's just a horrible human being. He is currently, in 2014, sentenced to 25 years in prison for abusing his daughter. So he's in jail. He's a terrible person. This match was boring. I did not like this. Tiger Mask was not doing anything Tiger Masky here at all.
No. Nothing Tiger Masky, nothing Misawa like.
No.
I think he hits one dive at one point.
We got a plancha by Tiger Mask to the floor,
which was great and seemed beamed out of another universe here, but otherwise nothing. My favorite part of this match is when Zumhoff has like a hamstring stretcher on, and Ron Trongard, in the most Ron Trongard voice ever, says, "That burns, that pulls, that hurts."
Tiger Mask wins with a somersault dive off the top. So picked up with a couple big Tiger Mask moves to end the match. We're then introduced to the former WWF Tag Team Champions, referenced as the former WWF Tag Team Champions, Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda.
I had no expectation that these men would be on this show. I did for once what you usually do, which is I did not look at the card for this. Because I just like, this show is going to be weird enough that I'm going to get something out of not looking at the card. And I had no expectation that we'd be seeing Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda here. We just saw them on a recent episode of, was that the Mid-Atlantic Worldwide episode? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they looked great. And the revelation, if you're a regular listener of the podcast, was, holy crap, there was a time where Mike Rotunda was freaking awesome. Will that continue here? What I know for sure after this promo is that the awesome part of Mike Rotunda, not him talking in 1986.
It wasn't him talking ever.
No. But at least at certain points, like as IRS, the gimmick was boring IRS agent who also wrestles. Here he is, fiery, accomplished former tag team champion babyface, and he has less energy than this crowd does.
Speaking of, and Rotunda's got he's got a nasty black eye here too. So speaking of the randomizer and these guys randomly showing up, their opponents are the Fabulous Ones. You want to talk about just a random matchup?
Weird. We got the Fabulous Ones, who I think everyone associates so much more with Florida. Or even Memphis. We talked about them on that Memphis episode in the bonus feed, which also, if you're listening in linear fashion, recently in the free feed as a special treat to everyone listening. Here, the Fabulous Ones are a couple years older. They're more grizzled. They're still wearing their wacky suspenders on the way to the ring. And they are the heels against babyface Mike Rotunda and Barry Windham. This is a matchup of former tag team champions from different promotions that I have no recollection of any of these guys spending time together in the AWA. But here they are in this cavernous building, and I'm excited. We might get our first good match.
The horrible guest ring announcer introduces him as Barry Windham.
I lost it. Barry Windham. And I just say, this man is certainly not Gary Michael Capetta. Barry Windham. It was as though it was hyphenated. Like as though it was like he was Barry Wind-Ham.
This was the best match on this show up to this point by a mile. This was, God. You want to talk about beamed in from a different universe. This match was so much better than anything else on this show. Windham has a visual pin twice on Stan Lane. The referee distracted both times. The crowd has really filled in at this point. So
Yes.
the later live arriving crowd has arrived.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
as filled in as it's going to be. Let's not kid ourselves. It's
yes.
still at best half full, but it looks respectable. And this is one of the first times in the show where you're actually getting a little bit of a reaction from the crowd. Like the rest of these matches that we've described so far, the matches happened, the fans were in the building, but you're not entirely sure if the fans knew the matches were happening.
Lane is going for a pile driver on Rotunda. Wyndham comes off the top, hitting Lane to break it up, and he gets the pin. This was a good match. This was the best thing on the show so far. We're hopefully the show's turning around at this point. I've got higher hopes now.
The finish, it was a little messed up in that Barry, I think, was expecting them to be closer into the corner than they were. And I don't know that the axe handle was what he was going to do, but it's what he ended up doing. He was not legal, but he got the pin anyway, and he bolted out of there. I got the impression he wasn't thrilled with the way it finished, but yes, by far the best thing on this show. I will never in my life complain about watching 1986 Barry Windham. Mike Rotunda, perfectly fine here. Not as great as he was in that worldwide show, but better than you remember him as. And yeah, maybe the show will pick up. I did love Ron Trongard, for whatever reason, calling the little sidekick that Stan Lane does. He kept calling it the Hiawatha kick. It's just like he made up something that like he thought was a martial arts term. Like I honestly think that's what happened.
And again, this is one of the reasons I don't look up the card. I let the card wash over me, and I'm surprised by guys I see. And holy crap, am I shocked as Giant Baba comes out? Like, here's a guy.
Not only does Giant Baba come out, he comes out to wrestle Bulldog Bob Brown, who we've seen, I believe, on the bonus feed a few times. Yeah. Well, on the Winnipeg show from like 1990, and I think we also saw him on something from like the 60s.
Yeah, exactly.
And he looked exactly the same at both times. Yes.
And that look is old. And he's Giant Baba versus
the look is old. Not only that, though, my only note on this match is that Bob Brown has the weirdest pattern of body hair I've ever seen in my life. He has on his back, like his back is hairless, except for this weird strip of hair that runs vertically up and down his spinal cord.
Yeah, that's gross.
Disgusting.
This match was horrible, and Baba won with a big boot.
Yes, the Russian leg sweep, the big boot. This was not one of the like every couple of years late stage Baba putting in an effort. This was not that.
No, this was the AWA and All Japan Baba having a working relationship.
Yes.
And getting Baba pictures in front of a giant crowd in America.
Exactly, which was so often what would happen back then. Guys would be sent over from Japan, and as much as anything, it would be for the magazines to get pictures so they looked, and not that Baba wasn't a giant star, but so they looked like big stars in America on the way back. That's exactly what this was.
Harley Race is here for an interview, and I'm like, how is he not in the WWF by 1986? Like,
yes, this feels like King Harley Race era, but somehow it is not.
Yeah, I looked it up, and so he joined the WWF as King Harley Race in May of 1986. This show is April of 19. We are weeks away from his debut in the WWF.
There you go. That's why it felt like that much. And his opponent is former AWA World Champion Rick Martel. And I am hyped at this point because Rick Martel was one of my favorite wrestlers growing up. And I have loved seeing pre-WWF Rick Martel whenever we have here or just my own watching, because, you know, he's still big, but he's not so over jacked that he's super athletic. And so I'm excited. We're seeing Rick Martel and Harley Race on this show, which I had no expectation of.
Yeah, it was all Martel early. Race hits a swinging neck breaker, goes to the top, but Martel throws him off, gets a 2 count. Both guys are trading punches, and you want to talk about guys who throw great punches. Here's 2 underrated guys throwing great punches. Rick Martel's never on that list.
No, Martel's never on that list. People in the know, people that are smart, and I mean that just in general intelligence. I'm not talking smart fan. You watch Harley race, and you know he throws a great punch. But yeah, Rick Martel, I had the same note. Like I forgot Rick Martel was a top tier puncher. This is really, really good stuff. The crowd sadly doesn't care about it at all. But my only complaint as it goes through is it's very clear, or at least it feels very clear as the match goes on, that as good as the action is, they're not building to anything. This is going to be a time limit draw, and it's a 20-minute time limit, or it's going to be some sort of other non-finish. But yeah, I'm not going to complain about seeing these guys wrestle each other, particularly given what we've seen so far on the show for the most part.
Now we got the race pile driver, his falling headbutt. We've got Martel throwing Race over the top rope, and they said it was not a disqualification.
It's the arbitrary decisions of what is and isn't an over the top rope disqualification. I grew up in the NWA on really the only exception was if you clothesline somebody over the top rope, or if you drop kick them and they went flying over the top rope, that would be not a top or not a disqualification, but everything else would be. It is a lot more gray area here at the Wrestlerock Rumble in the AWA.
Yeah, I was impressed with the gut wrench suplex, perfectly executed for a 2 count by Martel.
Are you sure it's a gut wrench suplex? Because I hear a body-to-body suplex by Ron Trongard. Again, him just making up stuff on the fly. And the best part about this is 2 minutes later, Harley hits a back suplex. Totally different move than the gut wrench suplex. And Ron Trongard calls it a body-to-body suplex. That's his catch-all for suplexes that aren't a vertical suplex. Much like when Tony Schiavone in the 90s didn't know what the top rope move was, it was a flying body attack.
Both men tumble over the top rope to the floor. They won't let each other back in. They're both counted out. So this ends in a double count out. But yeah, nobody cared. This was an interesting match to see, just because I've never seen this matchup. I, like you, enjoy young, fiery babyface Rick Martel, and yeah, this was definitely late stage Harley here.
This was
pre WWF.
This was the really, I wouldn't even call this a great match. This is getting to the very, very end of Harley Race being like a guy you could depend on to have a very good match. He was still fun in the WWF, just being Harley Race, but he wasn't really a great match guy at all. I enjoyed this, though. I also enjoyed we talk about top tier stuff. I thought a pretty top tier Gorilla Monsoon approved bear hug
into Race. A belly to belly suplex,
a body to body suplex, indeed.
We then move to the women's battle royal, where I'll name a few of the participants. Joyce Grable, we're big fans of Joyce Grable here on this podcast.
True innovator of the power bomb, Joyce Grable, is those of us who are, if you're a longtime listener going back to
season 1 listener,
1983 AWA, seeing that having that shocking development happen. The thing about this is you'll run down the names, but there's Candy Divine. She's the women's champion. The entire match, I'm like 94% convinced that Ron Trongard is calling her Candy Lime.
We also have Pat LaRue, Luna Vachon, a young Luna Vachon in here.
Who they call Leona Vachon.
Rose Divine, Taylor Thomas, Misty Blue Sims, Sherry Martel. We love ourselves some sensational Sherry here.
I wonder if Taylor Thomas, by the way, is she the mother of 90s television child actor Jonathan Taylor Thomas?
Could be. We've also got Debbie Combs, and of course, Candy Divine is your ladies wrestling champion. The battle royal is as bad as most battle royals. Debbie Combs celebrates after dumping Joyce Grable. Sherry comes from behind, tosses her out. Sherry celebrates her victory with Doug Summers and Playboy Buddy Rose. That's your uncle, Doug Summers?
Different spelling, but you never know. Maybe that's how I got into wrestling. Different spelling. My favorite thing about this match is the symmetry between everyone thinking that Sherry Martel was eliminated, a wrestler celebrating they had won a battle royal, and then Sherry Martel coming in to dump said wrestler out and win the battle royal. I would like to think, particularly given the relationship they would have as wrestler and manager later on, that this was the inspiration behind Shawn Michaels' strategy in eliminating Davey Boy Smith from the Royal Rumble in whatever that was, 94,
That was
95?
94. Yeah, yeah. Oh no, that was that had to be 95 because 94 was the Bret Hart Lex
Yes.
Luger
I've
Rumble.
told you
But
I've told on the podcast very briefly my story about that, by the way. I think maybe on the bonus content, not on the free feed, where that happened. Davey Boy Smith won the Royal Rumble. I had an early bedtime, and so turned off the TV, went to bed, went to school. All my wrestling fan friends are talking about Shawn Michaels winning the Royal Rumble, and I'm like, you guys are wrong. I watched the Royal Rumble. I saw Davey Boy Smith win. They're like, no, Shawn Michaels won. I'm so confused. I go home and I left the VCR running. So I went back and watched. And yes, in fact, Shawn Michaels did eliminate Davey Boy Smith. I had some serious egg on my face when I went back to school the next day.
yeah, so if you were wondering if this is a creative finish, it was in 1986, and it was popularized in many battle royals going forward.
Sherry was great in the promo.
Sherry's
Nothing else
awesome.
about this is memorable whatsoever. Sherry's great.
Kamala with Skandar Akbar taking on Sergeant Slaughter. And Sergeant Slaughter comes. Kamala is another guy who, in 1986, I don't think of as being in the AWA.
No, definitely not.
Slaughter comes out. He's passing out American flags to the children. Larry Nelson at this point comes to join Ron Trongard on commentary. This match, the only thing I have of note here is that Slaughter hit a standing drop kick on Kamala and slammed him, and it got the biggest reaction of the night by far.
People love them some Sergeant Slaughter. We go back to that Wrestling for a Cure show. You know, he was full on G.I. Joe here. He had the G.I. Joe logo on his trunks, leaned into that pretty heavily. The only note of consequence for me in this match is, as it is for many of the matches on this show, Ron Trongard commentary. Kamala, you know, he slaps his stomach, you know, that whole deal. Ron Trongard doesn't describe it that way. Direct quote, he says about Kamala, taps on the tummy. The greatest man alive, Ron Trongard.
Sarge has the Cobra Clutch on. Akbar's on the apron. Sarge lets it go. He gets held by Akbar. Kamala accidentally hits his own manager. Slaughter hits Kamala, and the bell rings. There's another disqualification. Slaughter uses Akbar's whip on both guys as they retreat. Your winner by disqualification is Sergeant Slaughter. They're having a difficult time bringing in guys and doing clean finishes here.
Yes. Well, that was the thing. It's this big show. You're bringing in guys from the outside. They're stars. You have your own stars. Can't decide who, you know, it's tough to figure out who to put over. So let's just do another DQ.
AWA Tag Team Championship. The challengers are the Long Riders taking on the champions Curt Hennig, the future Mr. Perfect Curt Hennig, and Scott Hall, the future Razor Ramon. That's Scott Hall here in the AWA. Hall gets a trophy before the match for being the most popular wrestler from Pro Wrestling Report.
Which Pro Wrestling Report was like one of those non-after mags, which you'd go, you know, you'd be at the grocery store, you'd read Pro Wrestling, you'd read Pro Wrestling Illustrated, you'd read Inside Wrestling. Your mom was still doing grocery shopping, so you grabbed Pro Wrestling Report, and then you saw ads for apartment wrestling. Like, what is that? Should I be looking at that? I'm 9. And then your mom came, and then you were done. You weren't looking at that anymore. Few things about this match. First, the Long Riders always confuse me because it's Wild Bill Irwin and Scott the Hog Irwin. And Scott the Hog Irwin always looks more like Wild Bill Irwin than Wild Bill Irwin does. Always throws me off. And the other thing about this that I was super excited to see and to determine was this is the first time we've seen Curt Hennig after that awful match that he had with Special Delivery SD Jones at the LA Sports Arena earlier on in this season, or from right around the same time period. And so we said on that show, like, is that the worst performance Curt Hennig ever had, even years later when he was not very good? Like, did he ever have another bad match around this time period like that? So now we get to see Curt Hennig. What will he look like here?
Spoiler alert, looks awesome.
Yes, particularly on this show compared to some of the other talent. Absolutely.
He does a great job here. Scott Hall, super green. And you can see how much further along Hennig is compared to Hall when they're switching in and out.
Yes.
Great action from Hennig here. He's throwing great punches. He's hitting drop kicks.
An awesome running punch, that running forearm, which would basically be the axe. Always love seeing him do that like punch to the top of the head, basically.
The Long Riders are a very punch kick offense. They don't do much else.
They belong on an MSG WWF show in 1974.
Yeah, there was they did hit one clothesline, and you got to see Hennig do his full inside-out bump for that clothesline. He made the hot tag to Hall. Hall ran wild. All four men were in the ring. Hennig goes over the top rope. The ref didn't see it. Hall gets dumped outside. Hennig is back up. He hits a missile drop kick off the top rope, gets the pin, still the champions. After the match, Scott Irwin hits the champs with a loaded boot to continue the feud.
This feud must continue.
12 minutes, 59 seconds. Good to see Curt Hennig bounce back in our minds.
Yes, exactly. And the timeline that is Wrestling at Random, a great bounce back performance from Curt Hennig here specifically for us. The only other note I have about this match is Ron Trongard is lusting over Scott Hall. It's the only way I can describe it.
He's a hunk.
Oh, he's an attractive man. And Ron Trongard is trying so hard to tell us that without telling us that. He's saying everything but, my God, Scott Hall is hot, without actually saying it. He was saying what everybody in the building was thinking, but it was just so funny to hear him dance around that subject in Ron Trongard voice.
It's so weird to see Hall and like looking so gigantic here, and then like he gets like normal size when he's in like the WWF and WCW. You feel like but he's still a gigantic human being.
He's the same size.
That's how gigantic everybody else was outside of this territory here. They interview Scott Ledoux.
Oh my God, this man should not be allowed to talk.
He says, "I'm coming down on you like 1,000 tons of Idaho potatoes." What?
Yes. I had to rewind this several times to watch. And yes, it was like 1,000 pounds or 1,000 tons. Either way, way too many Idaho potatoes for a pro wrestling promo here in 1986. They're going to have a boxer versus wrestler match. They being Scott Ledoux and the aforementioned rapper himself, Larry Zbyszko. And Larry Zbyszko has Ninja Go or Go the Ninja. We've had him a few times on the podcast before with AWA. Talk about Fashion Corner, which we don't visit as often as we should. Larry Zbyszko is wearing a satin gi that is just the most incredible thing you've ever seen. Why Eric Bischoff didn't wear this in WCW as the leader of the NWO to just get even more heel heat than he already had is beyond me. But this is a look to end all looks for Larry Z.
European rules. So we have 10 2-minute rounds. Call it Paging World of Sports.
I was just going to say, are we going to see any full Bostons in this one?
They are
wrist levers. I want a wrist lever.
They're wearing gloves somewhere between like MMA gloves and boxing gloves.
Yeah, they're like, I guess, kickboxing gloves. This is so weird because it's comedy, but it's not. It's like an early and very, very worked shoot fight. I will say, like, if you're judging this against like Johnny B. Bad versus Scotty Flamingo, and sort of like a wrestling worked boxing type.
I am
match,
now. Yeah.
I actually thought this was a little bit better.
Except they were like talking about it as like a boxing match, but then like they start busting out wrestling moves
Yes,
and
they
then
weren't
doing
clear on
martial
the
arts
rules.
stuff. And I was wildly I'm a stickler. I need to know the rules, and I was wildly unclear what was going on. Zbyszko was saved by the bell at one point in round 4.
Well, that Saved by the Bell was hilarious because he got knocked out cold. He got knocked straight all the way to the Western States, whose heritage he would uphold a couple years later with that championship belt. He's out, and then he's just back in okay the next round.
Round 5, yeah, Zbyszko rams Ledoux into the ring post for a disqualification. So
Shocking
let the DQs
disqualification
keep
there.
rolling.
Because you couldn't beat Larry Zbyszko or Scott Ledoux to mix up the finishes. Ledoux's promo afterwards is something else too.
This was bad and boring. I did not care for this at all.
He did mention Idaho potatoes, or no, he says in his post-match promo, he says, "I want to knock him out for the spud for the spud heads. I want to knock him out for the spud heads." So, like, is he a potato-based wrestler? Is this a rib on him, like hitting people too hard? What is this constant potato references? And then also, how did the WWF not end up signing Scott Ledoux and making him into a wrestling potato?
The AWA Championship on the line. Challenger, Nick Bockwinkle. We're used to champion Nick Bockwinkle. Here he's the challenger because the AWA champion is Stan the Lariat Hansen.
We are going to get Stan Hansen versus Nick Bockwinkle. I could not contain my joy when I realized this.
I was so excited. I'm like, what is this gonna look like? This is the biggest styles clash I can think of here as like best brawler and one of the best technical wrestlers. What's gonna happen? I'm on the edge of my seat.
Two of the best heels, but completely different style heels. Stan Hansen, the wild, out of control Southern brawler, and Nick Bockwinkle, the cerebral, technical, dastardly heel. Who's going to play what role? And we find out relatively early on, this is babyface fire Nick Bockwinkle against heel Stan Hansen, including, and if you follow us on social media, you know this already, Stan Hansen beating the holy hell out of Larry Nelson on the way to the ring. I watched this show a couple days before you did, and I was waiting for your reaction to that. And then I got a text from you. That has to be the GIF. And I knew what that meant. I didn't even need you to say who, what. I had already created the GIF.
Yeah, I knew it had to be because Larry Nelson leaves his position at the announce table to go interview Stan Hansen as he's coming out to the ring. So he's got to be nuts because, or he's never seen a Stan Hansen entrance because
he clearly hadn't time traveled to 1990 WCW when Missy Hyatt tried to get into Stan Hansen's locker room, because that didn't turn out well either.
Any All Japan entrance of Stan Hansen is him abusing fans and watching fans having to run in terror to not be killed by Stan Hansen. Here he comes out here. Larry Nelson tries to interview him, and Stan Hansen just beats the crap out of him. It is incredible. Watch it. If you don't follow us on social media at Wrestle at Random, we put the clip up there. Holy crap, was this hilarious and awesome. He kills him in the aisle.
He kills him, but then like 30 seconds later, Larry Nelson is back at the broadcast booth and he's fine. That made me angry.
I was not thrilled that he came back. I thought he had to be gone for the rest of the show after that beatdown.
Be gone for the rest of the year.
The bell rings and this match starts. It's a fight, and they're fighting. Bockwinkle hits a knee lift, lots of punches. Hansen cuts him off. Nick goes with some mat wrestling, gets a hammerlock on. They're trading shots again, but Hansen quickly with the advantage. When it's a fight, Hansen has the advantage. When it's wrestling, Bockwinkle's maintaining the upper hand. So this is fun to watch him go back and forth between both styles here. It wasn't one guy wrestling the other guy's style. And
it makes sense, and it also makes you wonder as the match goes on, okay, which guy is actually going to be able to at some point get the upper hand in the other guy's style? In terms of upper hands, Ron Trongard did not have upper hand with the English language here, as he said that Stan Hansen was from Borges, Texas, which is not the same as Borger, Texas. He also did tell us that Stan Hansen flew 16 hours from Japan directly to this show. And this is during a really interesting time in Stan Hansen's career where he's a top guy in Japan and he's the champion in the AWA. And so there's a lot of questions of how do we actually get the title off Stan Hansen? You put it on him. That's a lot easier than it is figuring out how you're going to be able to take the title off of him. And that ended up falling apart in spectacular fashion also.
This was an intense pace for 1986. Great action. Bockwinkle gets a sleeper on. Hansen gets the ropes for a break. They both tumble outside the ring. Head first into the steps goes Bockwinkle. Back inside, they're trading punches, and Hansen drops Bockwinkle throat first across the top rope. He hits a suplex with a float over by Bockwinkle for 2. A big slam by Bockwinkle. He's going for a second slam, and we get the ref bump. Bockwinkle gets a visual pin on Stan Hansen.
He gets 2. He gets 1 and then gets another immediately after. So that's 2 visual pins for Stan Hansen or for Nick Bockwinkle. That's where you immediately know, if you had any questions going into this, that there's no way Nick Bockwinkle is beating Stan Hansen. That's the way he saves face and gets out of this. He
hits a pile driver, still no ref. A backdrop by Hansen. Bockwinkle goes over the top to the floor. If you said he's disqualified, you got it. He's DQ'd.
Take another drink. My notes are just Hansen over the top, and we get a DQ, and then I can't say, because this is a clean podcast, what my notes say in all caps afterwards. This I understood for all the reasons I said earlier. There was no way this was going to have
it's
any
not
other
their main event. It's not the main event of this show,
No.
So it's fine to do what you had to do here. But man, after watching so many DQs, it just seemed tired at this point.
Yes.
But
in a vacuum, it's fine. The problem is you had 5 or 6 other similar finishes already that you can't tell me were as necessary as this finish was. Like, this you had to do. I get it, but the other ones, no.
Lame finish to a really fun match. I highly enjoyed this match.
Yes.
It was 10 minutes and 8 seconds of all action.
Great pace. Also think back to the little person's match that was only 7 seconds shorter, but felt 20 minutes longer than this.
Yes.
This was just nonstop action, in some ways reminiscent of those mid-'80s All Japan matches that we reviewed, where there maybe isn't like a lot of focus in terms of it building to something as the match goes, but it's just nonstop pace from guys you wouldn't necessarily expect a high-speed style from. And it was also fun to see Nick Bockwinkle as the underdog babyface challenging for the title instead of being the champion that's being chased.
Cage is up for a cage match featuring a tag team, King Kong Brody, who is Bruiser Brody, taking on the Barbarian, who is not that Barbarian.
Teaming with the Barbarian, who is
with the Barbarian. He's not that Barbarian.
It's Nord the Barbarian. They don't call him that, but that's what it'd be known as later. Nord the Barbarian, who is John Nord, who would go on to be the Berserker in the WWF.
He's managed by Sheik Adnan El Casey. So
Bruiser Brody
and Nord the Barbarian. Their opponents, Jimmy Superfly Snuka and Greg Gagne.
Natural tag team. Also weird, because if you were a fan of All Japan during this time period, you were very familiar with Bruiser Brody and Jimmy Snuka as a tag team. So it was strange to see them here on opposite sides of a steel cage match. And yeah, Jimmy Snuka and Greg Gagne, you talk about 2 guys next to each other, one who is the epitome of what an 80s professional wrestler looked like physically, and one who is the epitome of what the son of the booker looks like in professional wrestling. That's Jimmy Snuka and Greg Gagne next to each other.
If Gagne and Snuka win, Vern Gagne gets Sheik Adnan El Casey for 10 minutes in the cage.
10 minutes. Do we really need 10 minutes of Vern and Sheik Adnan El Casey? 5? Okay, 10. That feels more like a punishment for us than a reward for Vern.
Yeah, so really rooting for Brody and Barbarian here. So you get where to begin? There's Gagne gets busted open. Brody kills him with a perfect pile driver.
Oh,
Loved it.
terrifying stalling pile driver, but Snuka makes the save. Also, at the beginning of this match, Larry Nelson says, and this is, I feel like he was channeling Ron Trongard. He says, Greg Gagne is 100 miles an hour faster than these two bruisers, and Jimmy Snuka can fly 20,000 feet in the air.
I was angry at the beginning of this match because they're following tag team rules in a cage match.
Oh, I had the same notes. It made me so mad. Why are we sticklers for the rules when you're surrounded by a steel fence?
Well, yeah, and then all 4 men are in the ring at some point, and like we're told the referee can't do anything about it.
Yeah, then why should, if the referee can't keep all 4 men out, then tags shouldn't matter either. Tags should never happen in a steel cage match.
Absolutely correct. So this was already off to a weird start. Gagne holds Barbarian as Snuka comes off the top, but Barbarian moves and Snuka hits the headbutt to his partner, Greg Gagne.
Then the not Barbarian, Nord, murders Greg Gagne with a clothesline. This was the most brutal spot of the night. Particularly given the size difference. Yeah. Nord the Barbarian is significantly bigger than Bruiser Brody. And Greg Gagne looks like a middle manager. And this collision follows that form.
Finish comes as Barbarian is holding Snuka from behind. Brody charges in and hits a drop kick. The force knocks Barbarian back a little bit and Greg Gagne is on his knees behind the Barbarian, so he falls backward, getting tripped over the back of Gagne. Snuka then jumps on top and pins the Barbarian. Jimmy Snuka and Greg Gagne win. So the Sheik will be in the ring for 10 minutes with Vern Gagne.
Yeah, really, the only thought about this match is I just love when we get to see Bruiser Brody. He's one of those guys that you talked about with other guys, Nick Bockwinkle, other guys that just weren't in promotions that we grew up on. And Brody was everywhere, but just we never saw him as kids. You always read about him. And so to actually see him just being Bruiser Brody in all these matches, including this one, was great. And I loved the team of him and Nord the Barbarian. Nord is not great, but he's big, he's terrifying, and he can do jobs. So it makes Brody matches more dramatic because there's a chance that Brody, or the side he's on at least, could actually lose.
We've mentioned it on other podcasts in the bonus feed where there's an alternative timeline where guys like Magnum TA and Bruiser Brody have runs as world champions and are top guys, and holy cow, the wrestling world would have been completely different if Brody lived or Magnum TA didn't have his accident.
Yeah, into the 90s. We've talked about it on the bonus feed lately when we've seen those guys. Imagine Magnum TA on Nitro, or Bruiser Brody on Nitro or Raw, or even more, imagine Bruiser Brody getting a run in like mid 90s ECW.
Yeah, what a missed opportunity not having those guys. But yeah, so we'll talk about this real quick. Vern rams the Sheik into the cage a couple times. He's bleeding. He whips Sheik with his own gun belt. Sheik gets some offense in.
Adnan Al-Casey, by the way. To me, like, we talk about managers that are worthless and useless. You with Grand Wizard, which I see, me with Paul Jones. Sheik Adnan Al-Casey, he's not even like the top 3 of wrestling manager Sheiks. He's just a total zero.
Sheik got some offense in, but gets caught in a small package, and Vern Gagne wins his revenge fight with a small package. It just seemed weird.
Pissed me off, and I had the notes right here. Vern inside cradle out of nowhere, and apparently that is his revenge.
Yeah, it's like, okay. And we go, the cage is still up. I thought that was the main event. Anytime Vern Gagne is on, I thought that was going to be the end.
Especially because as we were watching the video, which we should mention is available on Peacock, and also as of this recording, you can search and find on YouTube. There's like 8 minutes left on the video file at this point. So I'm like, there can't be a main event.
Oh, there can be. Cage is still up, and we've got time. So it's the Road Warriors taking on Michael P.S. Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, the fabulous Freebirds.
I don't know what's weirder, the Freebirds in the AWA in 1986, or the fact that it's the Jimmy Garvin, Michael Hayes version of the Freebirds here in the AWA in 1986, taking on the Road Warriors, which that doesn't surprise me because Road Warriors were really the only thing keeping AWA afloat in 1986 after Hogan and Heenan and Mean Gene and everyone left. But yeah, this is not what I was expecting to be the main event of this show.
No, and people wanted to see Vern. People wanted to see the Road Warriors. And
Yes.
so this is a good way to end this show. The first move of the match is Michael Hayes hitting a pile driver on the Hawk.
Yes. Yeah. Hawk, or as Ron Trongard would always call him, the Hawk and the Animal. And yes, this was even earlier than usual.
Move.
Like, we would see this a lot in Road Warriors matches, even in the WWF time, where early in the match, Hawk would get pile driven and then would get up. But there's not even a lockup. Like, they're face to face. Hayes just grabs him, puts him in the pile driver position, drops him, and then we go. So it's clear they had to be out of the building at a certain time. The little people went way too long. Whatever else went way too long early. And someone, I'm hoping not one of the little people, I hope it wasn't Little Tokyo from Chicago, Illinois. Maybe they sent him in to tell the Road Warriors that they had their time cut because they're both worked Chicago natives. But whoever had to tell them this, I don't envy it. This was clearly cut for time.
Yeah, this was Road Warriors just running wild here. Animals in. He's pressing Garvin over his head a few times before he slams him. It's all Road Warriors. Freebirds had a little advantage until all four men get in. Hayes grabs a weapon out of his tights. He comes off the top, accidentally hits his partner.
Which we saw at least once earlier on this show. That
seen
same
it
spot
3 times. If you count, Kamala and his manager, we saw it with Brody and Barbarian. We saw it with every tag team had this happen to them. And he accidentally hit Garvin. Animal pins Garvin for the win. The Road Warriors celebrate 7 minutes 18 seconds, and the show goes off the air. Yeah, holy cow!
Not much to that main event. The weird thing about it to me was that I guess they were the Freebirds. Garvin was relatively early on in his run as a Freebird, but they didn't get along. There were a bunch of times where they wouldn't make the tag for each other, and it seemed like it was more than just the they're scared because it's the Road Warriors. So I don't know. This is like so many things on this show. This is a weird period of the Freebirds that I don't remember. And we could say that about 5 or 6 different acts on this show.
Favorite thing on the show for you?
Oh my God. There was so much.
There's 5 hours of show here.
I mean, Ron Trongard made this bearable just because he's so entertaining in his own Ron Trongard way. To me, it's maybe the action in Bockwinkle, Hansen. And Hansen beating up Larry Nelson. It's seeing Rick Martel be Rick Martel in 1986. 1986 Barry Windham is in that mix. But I think if I had to choose one thing, it would be Bockwinkle and Hansen, even though the finish, like everything on the show, was unsatisfying.
I agree. That was by far my favorite thing. Hansen killing a guy in the aisleway, and then all action and fun stuff with 2 conflicting styles. I highly enjoyed that match. Highly enjoyed all the things you mentioned as well. And seeing Bruiser, Brody, and Nord the Barbarian as a team, another fun team there. So definitely worst thing on the show. There's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, for me, there's a lot to choose from. I think on a macro level, it's the finishes. On a micro level, you could pick out a bunch of matches, but to me, the most objectionable thing was having to see Mitsuharu Misawa as Tiger Mask work down to Buck Zumhoff's level and be sullied by wrestling with Buck Zumhoff. But the first half of this show in particular is just dire.
Yeah, there's the whole first half is terrible. There's nothing worse though than Giant Baba and Bulldog Bob Brown
Ugh.
as an attraction to watch. Like that was hard to watch, and I didn't want to see this. This is why there's not like a Legends division where
No.
old guys fight.
This is
It-
also what clipped shows were invented for. Every All Japan show you watch from the 80s and the 90s, Giant Baba is in a match that went 12 minutes and we see 73 seconds of it. We needed that level of editing here.
we did, and and Vern winning his revenge match with a small package, so weird.
It was very weird. Really, you talk about macro level as far as worse things. I think it's just the show itself, in that, again, as we talked about at the top of the program, at the top of the podcast, this was the AWA's answer to WrestleMania. This was their attempt, maybe you could even say a last gasp attempt, to be the national alternative to the WWF. We talked about, you think about on the bonus feed, the score, the brawl to settle it all, or the war to settle the score, whatever it was. Think about that. And then think about this, the energy. And then this is just completely dead. There's no pomp or circumstance. It's just a show in a big half-empty building.
Yeah, the no entrances, the nope, no, not even like you say no pomp and circumstance, but no, like there's nothing other than the building to tell you this is a big show
Yeah.
and the participants, right? But like but getting like weird random local celebrities just for it's not like they were interjecting guest ring announcers all over the place that were like total zeros.
None of
And
them are
like,
relevant. It felt like a big arena show that happened to have some cameras there instead of this huge, spectacle.
yeah, but the guys who you wanted to be great were pretty great here, and yeah, it was a long show. Do not need to watch. You can pick and choose some things to watch out of it if you want to go watch it. But yeah, definitely do not hunker down. It took me 3 viewings to get through this.
Yeah, it took me 3 viewings, and I'm not going to lie, I took advantage on a few of these matches of the slightly faster speed because I just could not handle it.
No, I buckled down, watched the entire thing in its entirety, and it's a hard long watch, but don't do that. But definitely, there's some things to check out if you are looking for something on Peacock or YouTube to watch now. So, with that, we are going to wrap it up. We're calling it a podcast. If you're listening in linear fashion here in the free feed, last week you heard an episode of our bonus content. We released it for free, and the review of Memphis Wrestling. You can hear bonus content. That is an example of the bonus content you can hear right now. It's an extra episode every single week. All you have to do is subscribe via Patreon, patreon.com/wrestling at random. Or if you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, hit the subscribe button right there in the podcast player you're listening to right now, your Apple Podcast feed, and it will unlock the entire catalog of back episodes. So you can go through and listen to some of the ones we talked about here on the podcast. So we have an entire catalog, almost 100 episodes at this point, available to you as soon as you sign up for just 1 month. You get all of them, and then a new show every single week. Also, video versions of those podcasts as well. All that's up at patreon.com/wrestling at random. You can also follow us and interact with the show via social media. That's at Wrestle at Random for both Twitter and Instagram. Facebook.com/wrestling at random as well. Or you can send us email the old-fashioned way, wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. I don't know if I should say thank you, Randomizer. That was an odyssey, an absolute odyssey of a show to watch, to get through a journey. But like you said, the guys that we would want to be good were all good. We just had to swim through the swamps to get to those matches. But good time was had. And yeah, we'll see. Hopefully the Randomizer picks a not 5-hour AWA show next week.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.